Good morning, climate classmates. Welcome to our webinar where we make climate conversation, discussing how climate change affects us, but also apply our own expertise and knowledge on how we can engage the people close to us in climate conversations. We are grateful to have you with all of us today. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Leslie V, but you can call me L. I am a senior year college from Miriam College, taking up international studies, and I am your climate classmate host for today. To formally start, let us all welcome the Dean of the Faculty of Management and Development Studies, UP Open University, Dr. Joanne V. Serrano.
Hey, good day, everyone, and a warm welcome to today's Let's Talk It Over, Make Climate a Conversation. It is indeed my pleasure and honor to welcome everyone who is participating in this event. This event is not just happening here at UPOU or in the Philippines, but is actually part of a coordinated effort across the globe with more than 40 countries engaging students in a series of events focused on encouraging teachers and students to move from climate despair to climate repair. This teaching webinar is in collaboration with BARD Graduate Program in Sustainability and the Worldwide Teach in Philippines. This is actually the third consecutive year that the Faculty of Management and Development Studies, UP Open University, has organized a teaching webinar. The first teaching webinar was held on April 7, 2021, that was through the Master of Environment and Natural Resources Management program of UPOU, while the second teach-in webinar was held on April 2, 2022, and it was in collaboration with the WWTI. Now, many of us in the academic community are aware that one of the most pressing issues of our time is climate change. We are all aware that the consequences of a hotter world are more intense typhoons, rising sea levels, flooding, drought, crop failure, forest fires, climate vulnerable communities, and even climate refugees. But we have to ask ourselves, beyond the academic community, are we able to talk about the climate crisis with our family members, friends, colleagues, and immediate community members? I will assume that the answer is no. This is one of the main objectives of this teaching webinar, Make Climate a Conversation. We need to expand the conversation beyond the climate activists and environmentalists and show that everyone must be part of the solution, whether they are musicians, artists, scientists, managers, or engineers. The Teach-In is meant to promote dialogue about climate change with the hope of bringing students and community members from a space of being climate aware to being climate engaged, and from a stance of climate despair to a proactive stance of climate repair. We just have roughly 7 years before our target of 2030, so FMDS is organizing another teaching webinar targeting all students, especially UPOE students from different programs. And the main goal of this year's teaching webinar is to teach participants how to make climate a topic for regular conversations. I hope that through this webinar, we can all play a role in helping address the climate crisis. We will hear from experts in the field as well as individuals who will share practical tips on how to make climate a conversation. Through this webinar, we hope to inspire and empower each other to take action, to make changes in our daily lives, and to become advocates for policies and activities that will help us mitigate and adapt to the impacts of climate change. Let us all engage in this important conversation, listen to each other's perspectives, and work towards a sustainable and equitable future for all. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Serrano. Now that we are all pumped up by her message, let's build it up more as I give the virtual floor to Dr. Ivan Goodstein, the Director of the Graduate Programs in Sustainability at Bard College in New York, USA, and the co-director of the Worldwide Teach-In Internship.
Hello, my name is Ivan Goodstein, and I'm an economist and director of the graduate programs that focus on sustainability at Bard College in New York. I'm also the co-director of the Worldwide Teach-In on Climate and Justice. And I want to welcome you today to the University of the Philippines Open University teach-in. I want to thank you for being part of this really important conversation. And I also want to thank the organizers who have been working with us in the Philippines to put on not just this event, but many, many other teach-ins across the Philippines in the coming days. So today we're going to focus on this critical question of climate repair. Climate repair. Now, a lot of us have been in a state of climate despair, climate depression, because we understand that the world is getting hotter all the time, every year. It's getting hotter year after year. And that this is leading to more intense typhoons, rising sea levels, droughts, crop failures, massive forest fires, and increasing numbers of climate refugees. And this despair really arises from a sense that this thing is too big and too inevitable and too unstoppable, and there is just nothing that we can do about it. And that is actually the biggest threat to our future, right? Is this sense of withdrawal and this sense that somehow somebody else is going to be the one that's got to solve this problem. But in fact, this work of climate repair has to be the work of tens of millions, of hundreds of millions of people around the world in their everyday lives. And what we're going to be talking about at the Worldwide Teach-In is how we can all do this in our personal lives, in the choices we make about energy and transportation. We can do it in our professional lives. And I think that many of you over the next 5, 10, 20, 40 years will be doing very good work around climate repair. And you'll be doing that as business people, as writers, as artists, as engineers, as scientists, as lawyers, and the many different professions that you will pursue, because climate work touches everything. And we need all of those people engaged and working to repair the climate. So there's your personal decisions, there's your professional work, and then there's also your political lives, the ways that we show up in the world, in our communities, as volunteers, and in the political leaders that we support and the policies that our cities and states and nations adopt. All of this is very important, and all of it relies on us engaging in this work of climate repair. So that is the focus of the conversation today. How can we all be a part of this grand project, this great project of humanity? And ultimately, it's about justice, right? It's about the world that we believe we can create, the sustainable and just and prosperous world for our children and grandchildren, but not only our own children and grandchildren, for everybody on the planet. So thank you again for the wonderful conversations that you're going to be having today and the ideas that are going to be discussed and spread. And we will be back in 2024. We will be having a worldwide climate education week, and we want to see twice the number of teach-ins and twice the number of students involved in 2024 as in 2023, because we have to grow the number of people who are engaged in this so important work of climate repair. So thank you, and have a great conversation today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ivan. At this point, I'm all ready to listen to all of our speakers today. Allow me to introduce our first speaker. Dr. Pedris M. Orencio is an experienced international researcher specializing in urban and regional planning, environmental risk management, and climate resilience. He is the former head of the research department at the Southeast Asian Regional Center for Graduate Study and Research in Agriculture, a former postdoctoral researcher in Kyoto, where he worked on coastal risk and vulnerability, the nexus of water, energy, food, and climate change adaptation, and has published papers on these topics. With his contributions, he received the International Environmental Leadership Award. At present, Dr. Ped is an associate professor and concurrent program chair of the Diploma in Land Use Planning at the University of the Philippines Open University. He serves as an advisor to EcoEssentia and a member of the editorial board of the Journal of Fisheries Technology and Aquatic Sciences. He holds PhD and MS degrees in environmental science from Hokkaido University, Japan, an MA degree in urban and regional planning from UP Diliman, and a bachelor's degree in fisheries from UP and the Visayas. So without further ado, I'll be giving the spotlight to Dr. Patrice Orencio. Let's give him a virtual round of applause.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Let me just put up my slides. Okay, I hope you're seeing my slides now. Sorry. Is that okay? You can see my slides. Okay. So good morning again. So it is my privilege to be in this online event. No, today I will attempt to walk you through the process of identifying and the underlying symptoms of a climate-related problem. We're talking about climate repair. But before we do this, it is worthwhile to first acknowledge them, which is basically a first step when you try to solve any problem. Then we try to understand these symptoms. We assess them by observing, feeling, and determining their direct manifestations in our lives, in our properties, in our places. And by finally acquiring that knowledge of the causes that created the problem, we discuss the course of action that can potentially solve these concerns. So in the next 25 minutes or so, I will be talking about climate change processes, the physical changes, impacts, and severities expected in different areas as shown by evidence and confirmations. Afterward, I will introduce some pressing issues caused by these impacts that can be used in decision-making and in instituting priority actions. I will then discuss the priority actions and will provide some key suggestions on strategies that will allow society to better cope with the impacts through climate mitigation and adaptation. When I talk about climate, I always start with this differentiation from the weather. So climate is the general weather conditions of a particular location over a longer period of time. So, but a small fraction of that period that we experience on a shorter basis is what we call the weather. It actually tells us if it's warm, cold, wet, dry, chilly, or hot, which is basically what we're experiencing right now. So the changes in weather conditions tells us what clothes to wear, but climate tells us what to buy. It is important to know these differences because between them, we know how to associate this with decision time and planning. So to illustrate climate, here's a map of the world's climate based on the Köppen classification system. We can say that the main differentiation among climate regions is basically on local vegetation, which is influenced by temperature and precipitation under the changing seasons. Basically, there are 5 major types represented or coded using capital letters A, B, C, D, and E. Type A represents tropical climate, type B, arid and desert climate, type C, temperate climate, type D, continental climate, and type E are the polar and alpine climates. But among the areas that belong to the tropical climate or type A is the Philippines. So we know that it's located in the equatorial region, and being a maritime country, it is characterized by relatively high temperatures, high humidity, and abundant rainfall. So these factors are also determines the land area that differentiates 4 climate typologies in the country. But in many respects, it has similar climate to countries in like Central America. So the moisture content in the Philippines atmosphere is high due to temperatures and the surrounding bodies of water. So if you're coming from abroad and maybe you plan to visit the Philippines, come before the rainy season. Because if you're not fond of the humid weather, you can just go and visit Baguio, whose annual average temperature is about 18 degrees Celsius. This is basically to allow you to escape from the country's general warm weather. But what really creates our climate? it is the balance between the incoming and outgoing energy from the sun. So the solar energy that goes through the Earth's surface is either absorbed, reflected, or radiated back to space. So the ample amount of energy that remains is used for the physical processes. So the heat coming in Earth fuels the processes that runs the very cycles known as geochemical cycles, particularly elements such as oxygen, carbon, sulfur, nitrogen, water, and phosphorus. They are decomposed and decomposed to stimulate the flow to and from abiotic compartments of the Earth. So basically, the biotic compartment is the biosphere, and the abiotic compartments are the atmosphere, hydrosphere, and the lithosphere. As it moves from the spheres, these elements actually accumulate, dissipate, and adjust more rapidly to any changes in the biosphere. But there are also gaseous cycles such as carbon, water, oxygen, and nitrogen, which actually tends to move rapidly than sedimentary ones. For example, this includes sulfur, phosphorus. But similarly, through the cycles, these elements form and are removed naturally by the Earth's processes. But when the rate of the formation exceeds removal, they accumulate and increase the positive radiative forcings, and thereby emitting heat to the lower atmosphere than to the space, thereby contributing to warming of the Earth's surface. And some of them are actually known as greenhouse gases. There are more of them, but in terms of their composition, the top gases here are the ones that really contribute to the greenhouse effect. So for us to know the future, we must understand the past. And as we go back in time, we can find physical processes contributing to the changes in climate across eras and periods. We have paleogeography and paleoclimate studies that have provided us significant evidences of temperature fluctuations, such as the shift from cold and warm, as you can see here. And these are actually brought about by various activities, from volcanic activities to land formations to plant colonization and configurations by the continents, which actually happened until the last ice age in this current era that we have now. This has actually started, this era that we have now, it's actually started around 2.5 million years ago. But as we know currently, we're experiencing an upward trend in global temperatures. And we've heard this from the welcome remarks earlier. And they are causing changes in climate across the world. This modern global warming is actually attributed to the increase in the magnitude of the so-called greenhouse effect. And these are caused by, of course, the increasing concentration of greenhouse gases. So could this be the one that contributes to climate change? Let's try to find out. So remember how greenhouse gases contributes to greenhouse effect. And among them is carbon dioxide. So we can see, carbon dioxide. It has less global warming potential and than others, like for instance, methane or sulfur. But carbon dioxide has been used as a reference for having the global warming potential of 1 across time periods. This is the reason why some of the emissions are actually rated as carbon dioxide equivalents. So what we see here are actually 2 graphs showing global atmospheric carbon dioxide at its peak measurements. So the graph on the left is the atmospheric carbon dioxide and the contribution from the anthropogenic sources. On the other hand, we see that in the past 60 years, the increase in emissions has been faster when compared to the previous natural increases. With these increases in carbon dioxide emissions, we expect climate shifts due to radiative forcings. And as shared earlier, the energy that remains from the solar heat creates a new climate. This is characterized by an increase in the average mean temperature, creating areas with more hot and extremely hot weather and less extreme cold conditions. So the increase in the global average temperatures will then affect a complicated web of processes and systems on the Earth, and will result in isolated or compounded impacts, thereby affecting people, places, and our assets. And the foregoing evidence of this warming atmosphere that we're experiencing right now, and the atmosphere and the oceans, includes the diminishing amount, of ice and the increasing sea level rise, and of course the ensuing catastrophic events. So some of the effects from the physical processes can already be observed around the planet. So you can see here at the top photo on the left is about ocean acidification, which is found to alter marine food chains and the food supply to humans. Acidification could also decrease storm protection of the reefs, and affects tourism opportunities and of course other benefits. Below this photo is desertification, which leads to the loss of biodiversity and worsens the living conditions of many species. You can see from the right-hand side of this slide is the ice melt in Greenland, which is the world's second largest ice sheet. This melting has caused rising sea levels and surface runoffs. Actually, some published findings showed that the rising air temperatures are working with the warm ocean waters to speed up this melting process. But on the other hand, there are strong storms or typhoons like Haiyan, which happened in 2013. It was one of the strongest tropical storms ever recorded, with winds of more than 300 kilometers per hour. In some areas, like during this time, around 290 millimeters of rainfall was actually recorded, and much of which fell in 12 hours only. Also, waves of up to 7 meters in height battered the coastal towns of Leyte province, leaving more than about 7,000 people dead and about 2 million people homeless, more than 1 million families displaced. So the overall economic impact of this typhoon is estimated at about $6 billion. So on the other hand, this photo of an extreme flooding event in 2012 that affected Metro Manila is actually not caused by a typhoon in its own right, but it actually created typhoon-like damage. About 80% of Metro Manila was actually paralyzed because of flooding events. So the floods and the rain left 95 people dead, 8,500 homes were destroyed, and about 6,700 were damaged. People talk about the effects of this event in social media because it went beyond social stratification, as both the rich and the poor, the young and the old, educated and less educated, experienced the same situation. But according to the CRED, or the Center for Research and Epidemiology of Disasters, the 20-year average of occurrences of disasters covering the period from 2009 to 2018 has already been exceeded in 2019. This provides proof that events have been increasing over time, and they are affecting more people, places, and assets. Although it is worth recognizing as well that the number of deaths is going down. So meanwhile, according to the World Risk Index, which calculates the disaster risk of about 190 countries, and thus presents about 99% of the world's population, the Philippines, India, and Indonesia have the highest risk, followed by Colombia and Mexico. You can see that we are still high ranking in terms of world risk because of the disasters that our country is experiencing. So given that, we have discussed this physical process that led to the occurrences of climate-related disasters and their consequences. Let us not forget that the IPCC AR5 scientists have agreed and confirmed the human influences on the development of these systems. So we have to acknowledge that we are the major drivers of climate change and its effects. We have to acknowledge that the more we disrupt the climate, the more things get unusual. But looking at the brighter side, this actually gives us people, the institutions, the choice to cater to the management of the future impacts that actually affects us. So when we try to admit that majority of the emissions that contribute to the rise in the atmospheric GHG concentrations are actually anthropogenic in nature, we can start determining which humans' activities drive them more. So according to studies, the largest share is actually contributed by the energy sector, from which the biggest comes from the industrial energy, such as iron and steel manufacturing. And this is followed by infrastructure, such as buildings, and then transport-related activities. This tree accounts for 50% of the total emission from the energy sector. So we should also look at the main country contributors at the global level, as most of them come from developed countries. Cutting down on the GHG emissions would actually mean coming up with stringent policies enforced by countries according to their voluntary commitments in their national determined contributions. This is as per the Paris Agreement. But the majority of the contributions of the GHG emissions are actually found to come from cities, and many of them are non-OECD countries. So as cities, now we know them that they pursue growth and development, and they are more likely to have committed certain degree of climate change. But the more stable they become, such as more sustainable economic growth, they tend to manage the standards and regulations for carbon dioxide emission. So we can learn from cities that have actually embraced standards and regulations for carbon dioxide emission. But for us to better understand the future of atmospheric greenhouse gases, we need to understand them. Well, the scientists have already provided us with scenarios referred to as RCPs, or the representative concentration pathways. So this refers to GHG concentration trajectories, which is actually defined in the IPCC's AR5. So there are 4 scenarios here that would impact a range of temperature change or possible climate futures. So based on the scenarios, average temperatures based on 2010 data will likely increase beyond 2 degrees Celsius for RCP 6 and 8.5, and 1.5 degrees for 2.6 and 4.5. We note this projection since the increase in temperature will have serious consequences on the range of impacts across significant factors, and this affects our lives. And beyond 2 degrees Celsius, increase in temperature will actually decrease crop yields, cause drought in certain areas, and prevalence of extreme events. Some of these hazards will have severe consequences for vulnerable areas, and they affect people and assets depending on their level of sensitivity. And storms will affect coastal cities and contributing to the poor performance of the fishing industry, for instance. So while being exposed to climate impacts, a high concentration of vulnerable sectors consisting of a growing number of urban poor communities, including women and children, that exhibit the least capacity for risk reduction actually exists. So sometimes some study points out that differential impacts across sectors are affected by certain climate hazards, which requires differential approaches for risk management. So despite these events being experienced collectively, the impacts we differentiated across people, places, and assets. First, we must note that they are received according to the level of exposure and sensitivity. Second, they are defined according to both spatial connections, such as direct and indirect. But the best way to show the impacts is actually by illustrating a chain of events, such as this one, which starts from determining the physical and social processes that are changing the situation. We must consider the baseline conditions that serve as references for assessing these immediate consequences. Sometimes the impact of change can be very complex, such as this one, which wherein the cause and effect interactions of different physical, as represented by the climate factors and environmental, such as the water systems, or the socio-economic, such as the agriculture, in the same place, and they are actually integrated. So in both cases, these diagrams will help in the identifications of exposed elements, vulnerability variables, and of course, the impact indicators. So let me illustrate these impacts in urban areas. This is a highly urbanized city in the Philippines with residential areas and all critical road networks. Imagine the extent of risk if I overlay a flood hazard map. You can find areas that will be affected, including people and assets. So there's a need basically to determine the strategies. So we go back to these impacts of climate change and determine the effect on the sector. For floods brought about by increase in overall population, the strategy is to invest in climate resilient infrastructures. However, we have to surface differential situations, such as the norms, additions, access mechanisms, and the differential roles of women and men that can experience the differential impacts of climate change. Women and men have different vulnerabilities and capacities, and knowing this will help develop the climate actions. So this brings me back to the third A in this discussion, which is the discussion of the triple A of climate solutions, which is ACT. To reduce the potential impacts, we have to note about adaptation, which includes building resilience or managing vulnerability. Adaptation is actually achieved by reducing vulnerability, which is a factor of exposure and sensitivity, and increasing the adaptive capacity. So as mentioned earlier, adaptation starts with reducing exposure and sensitivity, which is contingent on hazards and their magnitude of effects, and the conditions of affected people, places, and assets known as sensitivity. But as an adaptive capacity, one action for flooding events, for instance, can be taking out the poor people from harm's way because this is the most practical approach. But of course, it entails resources. In short, to develop adaptation, there are critical steps rooted in capacities, the provision of support, and the access to resources, to name a few that should be considered. Subsequently, there are steps that are crucial in selecting and developing the strategy, and they make use of tools that facilitate knowledge from data analysis and processing. Adhering to these steps would actually help in organizing the information about vulnerability, exposure of people, places, and assets to effectively design climate risk management projects. And of course, conforming to the international and local frameworks and developing policies for climate management is imperative, but they should also ensure the promotion of gender-sensitive vulnerability and capacity analysis. This will advocate the balancing of the roles and responsibilities, interests and capacities, and the effect on both genders of these climate impacts. So at this juncture, I would like to recognize the contribution of women in the implementation of activities in the DRM thematic elements, from mitigation where women take part in public education, starting from their households, to building preparedness and response where they extend their social skills at community levels. And finally, in recovery, where women have greater clarity than men in making decisions. So the strategies that we consider are actually relevant to the scenarios that we would like to adopt. Shall we now allow ourselves to go into energy-intensive economic activities and unsustainable use of resources? Or shall we curb these practices and push regulation for population growth, utilize renewable energy and efficient energy strategies that do not compromise the environment? So the strategy that we consider is dependent on the scenarios that we adopt. We can choose from a range of actions that attend to the cause of climate change or mitigation its impacts. Both, however, must be carried out with investment, technology, and capacity building. So the investments are part of the climate action plan that can be developed with various stakeholders in a community to serve their guides in implementing the strategies. These strategies can be sectoral and by whole community approach so that no one will be left behind when we try to implement these climate actions. So here's an example prepared for transportation, wherein the subsector of energy, where both measures are crafted to respond according to the impacts of climate change effects, such as flooding and damage to infrastructure. So as part of the parting messages for this talk, we discussed that we need to acknowledge first the climate concern for us to move with actions. We rationalize strategies and suggest a course of actions and measures relevant to the climate impacts, as this will push the climate actions forward. But before any action, we must assess by understanding the current processes that affect basically the system and develop our knowledge of the elements that are being affected by the changes, which we use in crafting our strategies. When we develop the strategies, we should note that differential impacts and hence must go beyond the one-size-fits-all approach. And lastly, they must be tied with policies, capacity development, technology investments, because they will sustain all the climate actions. So let me stop at this time, and thank you very much for giving this opportunity again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ped, for giving us new perspectives about the concept and effects of climate change. Surely, our fellow climate classmates have their own thoughts too. At this point, the virtual floor is now open for questions. We want to know your thoughts too. You may type your questions through the comment section in our UPOU networks, UPOU YouTube, or UPOU Facebook page. Personally, one of the highlights that I have learned is the difference different climate impacts and how influential they are to each other, and the need to have a comprehensive decision making steps to ensure the effectivity of climate management policies. As a feminist, I also appreciate how Dr. Ped highlighted the gender perspective in the issue of climate change. This just shows that climate change and just gender justice is intersectional, and other factors, not just the environmental factors, really influences the climate management here in our country. One question that we have from YouTube is that how does climate change impact women differently than men?
Could you please repeat the question again?
Yes, sir. The question was that, in your own opinion, how does climate change impact women differently than men?
Okay, climate really impacts women, them men, because of the roles and responsibilities that women play in society. So, like for instance, we can see that um, when uh, when climate impacts, a certain area, there are um, there are things that women do, like taking care of the family, that men does not really think about. But on the other hand, there are really having these capacities of for women to actually take care of the impacts of climate, the impacts of climate while doing these roles and responsibilities is actually a challenge for them. So we can see that the differential actions and responses should cater to the roles and responsibilities that women play in the society.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pet, for that informative answer. There's another question from YouTube, and it states that what do you think are the actions that can speed up the mitigation of climate change, given that most of our countrymen are in vulnerable sector?
Okay, actually looking at the major causes of climate, we can see that energy sector contributes a lot. And of course, we cannot really provide solutions to the concerns of stopping, the energy, but we can do our contributions in conserving energy use. Like for instance, these are really practical solutions, like just turning off the power when you're not using it, turning off the lights, making sure that you are responsive in terms of the use of electricity. For transportation, one way would actually be to influence or influence the mindset of people to use an non-motorized vehicles, or come up with transit systems, that are more effective and cater for the general public. So our mindset is actually like we are that our roads are actually made for cars, when actually when you have development, it should be like people oriented, so that we will not be or will lessen our contributions to the greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ped. As much as we want to entertain all the questions, I am afraid that we would need to proceed for the next speakers of the program. Let us now move forward to our next presentations, and it is my pleasure to introduce you to today's second speaker. Dr. Benjamina Paula Gonzalez Flor is a professor of development communication, University of the Philippines, Los Baños. She is the chair of the Master of Development Communication program of the UP Open University. Prior to joining the academe, she was chief of the Monitoring and Evaluation Division of the Commission on Higher Education under the Office of the President of the Philippines. Professor Flor has been engaged as coordinator of the OSED-funded Philippines-Australia short-term training program and consulting team leader of World Bank projects in Pakistan, Lao PDR, and the Philippines. The most recent being the technical assistance for baseline studies under the Philippine Climate Change Adaptation Project. Based on her work, she wrote the book Innovative Strategies and Frameworks in Climate Change Adaptation, Emerging Research and Opportunities, along with her partner, Alexander. I cannot wait to learn more. Let us all give a warm round of virtual applause as we pass the virtual floor to Dr. Benjamina Paula Flor.
Good day, everyone. Isang makakalikasang umaga sa ating lahat. So first, let me thank Dr. John Zarano for inviting me to this forum. At first, I thought I could share or start a conversation about climate change with anyone. Unfortunately, I had to think twice. Then I started reflecting on my experience about climate change communication. Normally, we engage with local government units, farmers groups, the youth, and of course, students. We forgot to count in the women, who has a key role in communicating climate action through daily conversation. As we say, if something is not talked about, then it does not exist. It means that if you don't talk about climate change, then it is not there. Some are still in denial. There are skeptics, there are champions. Thus, to make climate change a part of our daily conversation, we should start talking about it. Usually, our news bearers, or marites as we call them now, are women. We rely so much on how information is spread through informal channels. Literally, the marites syndrome may be used for collective action. Why? This is because our source is vital, regardless of the nature or topic of the message. However, in daily conversation, we do not readily talk about climate change as a normal topic. We only get to talk about climate change if we have experienced it. The changes we feel about the weather, and perhaps changes we've seen in the last 50 years about our climate. So how do we get started? I'd like to share a book that I edited with Dr. Alexander Flor. The title of the book is Knowledge Sharing for Collective Climate Action. The book is an open educational resource registered under Creative Commons and is freely downloadable to our massive open online course or MOOC participants in the course Knowledge Management for Development, or KM4D. And our KM proponents have maintained that knowledge is best shared as lessons learned, good practices, and interestingly enough, stories. Thus, the volume contains both good practices and stories that provide collective action. Dr. Alexander Flor and myself have also written a book, as mentioned by Leslie earlier, entitled Innovative Strategies and Frameworks in Climate Change Adaptation, Emerging Research and Opportunities, published by IGI Global and indexed under the Web of Science. This book is a critical scholarly resource that examines the relationship between humans and the changing Earth, as well as the ways in which humans react to these shifts. And it features a wide range of topics such as neo-behaviorism, adaptation narrative, and even taxonomy. And this book is geared toward researchers, students, academicians who are seeking current research on the human response to shifting conditions on the Earth. So, how do we share stories? I would say through express. Express as a word can be an adjective, a noun, or a verb. As an adjective, it means operating at high speed, making few intermediate stops, and reaching its destination quickly. This implies that when we converse about climate change, we have to do it fast to prepare for any unforeseen changes. As a noun, it refers to an express train or other vehicle or public transportation. And as a verb, it means putting thoughts into words, utter or state to set forth opinions, feelings, and the like. This means that we have to convey our thoughts about climate change if we want to mainstream the topic. For this presentation, however, express is a mnemonic. So let's start with the first two letters, EX. EX stands for experience. Experience is the best starting point. As an adage, we say experience is the best teacher. Changing climate conditions like very strong typhoons or tsunamis can change how we view climate. Climate change is location specific or in situ. We won't appreciate changes in climate if we have not experienced it. The calamity or natural disasters as lived experience serve as trigger and motivator to encourage victims to talk about it within and among themselves. This experience, however, should be shared as knowledge to others who may not have been exposed to it, because the Philippines in general is highly vulnerable to climate change. So we don't know when are we going to experience particular changes in our climate or changing weather conditions. That is why we have to prepare, which is the next letter in the word express. P stands for prepare. Prepare a good topic to share. In climate change, we should talk about the issues like increasing temperatures, rising sea levels, or changing climate, water shortage, flooding, soil erosion, strong typhoons, especially in areas where they have not ever experienced before. Even cropping patterns, seasonal fruits, and the like. For instance, too much rain stops some fruit trees from bearing fruit. For the last 3 years, during the pandemic, fruits in season like rambutan, lanzones, even durian did not bear fruits. If ever it did, it was too little because of the changing climate. And part B of the book, Knowledge Sharing for Collective Action, starting page 93, contains stories written in Dalaw Turo, an approach that the Department of Environment and Natural Resources employs to tell stories about climate change. Topics are about forests, wildlife, coastal resources, water bodies, river banks, geohazards, and many more. In doing these stories, we have to do research. Dutifully research on the topic. Why do we experience changing climate? And Serped has given us a good background on how it's done. What is climate change? We have to get our facts right. We need to provide accurate information based on science from a reputable source or indigenous knowledge. There are many biosignals or bioindicators that our village chiefs or our community members experience during these changing climate conditions. And there are also many references that explain climate change that even children can understand. We can explain these concepts simply. That will lead to educating the people of how climate change affects the food chain, the yield or productivity, which eventually be lost if we do not do something about it or do our part in mitigating it. The next letter in Express is everyday. Make climate change issues part of everyday conversation as a form of conscientization. It is not a matter of persuasion, but providing an avenue for people to realize that climate change is real. Many are still in denial, so it's, I think, about time that we make climate change part of our sharing in the various communication platforms that we are enjoying right now. Daily exposure can arouse interest and awareness, leading to knowledge acquisition, thus may result to collective action. The first S in Express stands for storytelling. Storytelling is perhaps the best way to disseminate information about climate change. In this book, there are several topics that can be told in story form. Of course, creativity and imagination come into play. Mothers or grandmothers are the best storytellers. They can do this during bedtime stories. Teaching how to conserve water can be done when giving their bath. Visiting forests, beaches, caves can serve as environmental interpretations. Visiting natural parks or even properly disposing trash can help mold a young mind to be mindful and create a mindset that can reduce the activities that people do to destroy their environment. And having that mindset is very important. It's very critical to create that at a very young age. Stories, of course, have structure. We don't simply tell a story without plot. So a story must be conceptualized based on the topics that we have research on. So this should be simple enough, but can tickle the mind. Of course, a story has characters, as protagonists. So we have to choose characters that our intended audience can relate with. If the intended audience were children, then fantasy characters or Marvel heroes would be relatable. It should have a synopsis, or a plot. And a plot is the sequence of events in a story. Your plot must be planned, logical series of events having a beginning, a middle, and an end. And to make the story interesting, it should have conflict, because conflict is essential to the plot. Without conflict, there is no plot. So climate change, as technical as it may seem, can be told by incorporating human interests. We don't simply popularize the stories to make it understandable. We want people to understand, feel, and move them to action. Thus, our stories should end with a call to action. How can we collectively work as one or have a systems thinking that everything is related to everything else? Through storytelling, information is shared, and once shared, it becomes knowledge. And when knowledge is shared, it becomes wisdom, and hopefully transforms to become a habit or a norm, and eventually be able to help restore what we have lost and continue to lose. Last S stands for share. How climate change and climate solutions can be part of ordinary conversations. Be a marites with a purpose. Depending on the type of audience, the platform can change. As key, knowing your audience, the topic, platform, and structure can change. Using Messenger, for instance, you can start a conversation by asking your friends about the temperature where they are right now. With that trigger question, it can expand and show the awareness and knowledge level of our audience. You can then infuse explanations, root causes, and solutions. You will be surprised at the exchanges because they too have stories to tell. Sharing posts on mitigating climate change, like those from C4ICRAF or the Center for Forest Research Institute, can widen one's knowledge on the various ways to mitigate and adapt to climate change. So these Twitter posts or FB posts could be a start to talk about climate change. Twitter is, how many characters can you use in Twitter? So it gives you the gist of what the topic is about. And these are written primarily for discussion. So if we could start, participating in Twitter conversation, then it could propel, it could create a habit that we can talk about climate change on a daily basis. In essence, we can make climate change a part of our conversations through the Mnemonic Express. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Benji. Indeed, discussion is the first step in acknowledging any topics, as this is where we get to establish our strategies to reach our objectives. Even the technical issues such as climate change can be told through sharing of information with a storytelling. As Dr. Benji has mentioned, be a marites, be a messenger, and start a conversation. How about you, fellow climate classmates? Because by the power vested in me, I am opening the virtual floor for any questions that you have. You may type your questions through the comment sections in our UPOU networks, UPOU YouTube, or UPOU Facebook page. One of the questions that we have from Facebook is that how will you tell a 3-year-old that the climate health is already declining and that we should start helping in our own little ways?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it's very practical. Actually, I've been trying this with my grandson, but my grandson is 6 years old, no? So he could a bit understand. So while taking a bath, he usually waits because in Los Baños, the water gets warm as it runs. So he does not want to take a bath when the water is cold. So it has to run a bit. And sometimes it gets too warm. And so I tell him to conserve water. And he said, why? Because this guy, so I named the guy Lalugan. Who is Lalugan? While taking a bath, who is Lalugan? So I told him, oh, Lalugan is, he's a young boy like you who used to take a bath, but really wastes so much water while taking a bath. So what happens and it became interactive. I didn't even have a plan. No? I didn't even have a conceptual plan on how my story would run. But it was so interactive that we ended up in Laguna Lake. We talked about Mount Makiling, and then finally said, okay, I will not waste water anymore because I don't want to end up not having drinking water or even water to take a bath. So simple things like, keeping their trash away, and then so you have to put your candy wrappers in your pocket because if you throw your candy wrappers anywhere, it will clog our waterways, it will clog all this and all that, and then if the rain is too much, we will get flooded. So very simple stories. And sometimes we also do it in the evening. But of course, an inquisitive mind. And if you don't have a prepared response, then it will not complete the whole story. So you have to know what the topic is about. So if you want to talk about rising temperatures or global warming, then you have to talk about a car, a car in the middle of the road, and how is the heat trapped in that car, what happens, even the use of air conditioner. It's about energy conservation. So we try to use the air conditioner on a limited basis, but at the same time trying to explain the whys. And I think those simple ways of telling stories can instill the mind of a young child. At one instance, they went to botanical gardens. And then I asked him, so what did you learn in botanical gardens during their visit? I learned that trees produce oxygen. At a very young age, they're able to have that sense of their environment and the relationships to the environment. And if we could do it every day, then I think they would have a better generation because they are better informed. Tayo kasi reactive. In their case, it could be proactive, and repair may have a better chance of happening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Benji. I'm already taking notes as a tita with 3 nephews that are toddlers right now. Thank you so much for that. And for the next question, we have, how important are developments in ICT in terms of achieving climate justice for the marginalized? For instance, the farmers and the indigenous people.
Okay, thank you for that question. ICT has a great role to play in climate change. And many of these platforms, when we talk about ICT, we include telecommunications. We had a study we did in I think it was in 2016 or 2017. So it was about community radio stations. Community radio stations could be the missing link in promoting climate change. So if we could take advantage of community radio stations, because community radio stations technically are owned by the community, run by the community. And if we could mainstream topics such as climate change to become part of their everyday programming, may not really be everyday, but could be part of a regular programming, then we could increase awareness, we could increase knowledge, because knowledge and awareness are not one and the same. So if you increase awareness, then probably this awareness will transform into knowledge acquisition, and sharing that knowledge becomes wisdom. And through these community radio stations, community radio station may be the last mile linkage. Everything else can be lost during a typhoon or strong typhoons, dead batteries maybe, no cellular sites running or functional, but the radio stations through local connections, this may be our last mile linkage. Community radio stations have been in the country for so many years, and many of them are still thriving and have even migrated online. So now we only do not have terrestrial radio stations, but we have online radio stations as well. And if those topics, development-oriented topics like climate change can be part of programming, and they have many followers, and that could be a start of using ICTs for promoting climate change. Of course, our television channels or our cable television, like in Los Baños, at the College of Development Communication, we do have a local program called Dito sa Laguna, or DSL. So it talks about development issues, and one of those topics is climate change. We invite people from different organizations to talk about it. And of course, that sharing becomes part and parcel of the listeners, which runs across 5 municipalities, I think, in Laguna. Of course, our television stations have also started talking about climate change. I had one advisee at the Masters of Development Communication program at the UP Open University. She used to be with GMA, and then because of her thesis, they started talking about. Now they have a regular program about in the environment.
Thank you so much, Dr. Benji. Due to limited time, we really need to proceed with the next part of our program. But of course, all participants can still go ahead and type in your questions to promote discussion with our fellow climate classmates. Anyway, at this point, allow me to introduce Assistant Professor Lian Angelico Depante to discuss and present Greening the Class and Thus the Minds, some tips for integrating sustainability into the classroom. Professor Lian Angelico is an career academic who has multidisciplinary background in political economy, public administration, disaster risk management, policy studies, and Asian studies. Prior to joining the University of the Philippines as an assistant professor of public management, he was a senior researcher at the University of the Philippines Resilience Institute working on MSME resilience, green growth and development, and anticipatory action, among other topics. He earned his Master of Arts in Asia Pacific Studies from the National Cheng Chi University as a Taiwan scholar and his bachelor's degree magna cum laude in public administration from the University of the Philippines National College of Public Administration and Governance, where he concurrently serves as an affiliate faculty. Everyone, please welcome Assistant Professor Lian Angelico Depante. The virtual floor is yours.
Yun. Maraming salamat, Leslie, for that very generous introduction. I would just like to greet everyone na isa pong makabuluhan at makakalikasang umaga po sa aking mga fellow climate classmates. So that's what yun yung tinawag ni Ma'am Leslie kanina. Anyway, before anything else, please allow me to extend and express my heartfelt gratitude to our partners and organizers. Of course, most especially Dean Joanne of our faculty, FMDS, and to my ever reliable colleagues for making this event possible. And of course, for providing me the opportunity and space to share with you my stories, experience, and knowledge on climate change and action. So my presentation is entitled Greening the Class or Greening the Classroom and Thus the Minds. So some tips for integrating sustainability into the classroom. Before we actually move on to the presentation proper, allow me to, of course, discuss how my presentation will go. First, I'm gonna, my outline is pretty much straightforward. I'm gonna commence my talk with a brief contextualization of as to why climate change is a concern that we should all attend to, and why climate action is actually an existential imperative. This will be followed by a discussion on how we can all act, considering that, climate change is of everyone's concern. And of course, since we are also celebrating Women's Month, I will also discuss on the role of women in terms of climate action. Thereafter, I'm going to share some tips from personal experience as well as from the experience of our program, the Master of Public Management program, from our faculty, FMDS. So before I start, just a bit of a caveat. My presentation will be more on the conversational side. So this won't be really much into the I'm not gonna wear my academic hat now, but I'm gonna wear my my conversational side. So by the way, again, I'm Lian. My background is actually in political economy and public ad. So I've been doing resiliency work for several years. Focusing on disaster financing, advocacy, and anticipatory action. So, yeah. So again, I hope everyone doesn't mind, but allow me to start my presentation with a story of a little boy who seemed to be a tough looking on the outside, but a bit of a scaredy cat inside. So this boy is named Lian, or LA. He used to watch apocalyptic end of the world films like The Day After Tomorrow and 2012. So after seeing these movies, he got some nightmares here and there. But several weeks after watching these movies, he thought that, oh, these were not just, these seem to be works of fiction. We shouldn't be too concerned because these are not true. Clearly, I was not, quote unquote, green-minded then. So, but upon growing up and experiencing Ondoy in Metro Manila, I think Professor Dr. Ped earlier sort of like discussed Ondoy. That little kid realized that doomsday scenarios presented in those films were not really that different from the ones we are experiencing every time, whenever hazard struck. In fact, the rise in sea level has ensued on an annual average of 3.5 millimeters and is still expected to exacerbate at the global and local levels. So in our nation's capital, Manila, and of course the region, Metro Manila, we are expecting some parts, as illustrated in the map on the right side of our screen, to be submerged. So imagine, yung kanina dun sa 2012, we see that the statue in Rio is submerged. But this time, we imagine Malacanang Palace and Fort Santiago to be submerged. So that is expected to happen actually under the business as usual scenario by 2030. Next slide. So in the near future, we're not just expecting, sea level to rise, but also temperature. As we all know, global warming is continuously exacerbating, and compared to 1950s, Earth has already warmed for almost 1 Celsius. Again, we expect this to continue, and no less than the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has asserted that global warming, which was mostly anthropogenic in origin, will reach 1.5 degrees Celsius between 2030 and 2052 under conservative projection. But of course, recently, IPCC released another report making a final warning to us humans. So imagine, mangyayari na yung doomsday scenario that I was talking about earlier. And many communities across the globe are going to encounter yung mga submerging and flooding. The IPCC also adjusted the projection with a critical limit of 1.5 Celsius, now expected to occur sooner, between 2030 and 2035. So imagine that's roughly a decade from now. And given that, we have to really act on it. Again, the same report by IPCC mentioned that climate change impact on human system. Nakita dito sa table na ito, yung different impact of climate change on human activities and human system. As you can see in the table, itong mga impact nito ay cross-cutting, ranging from agriculture, human health, well-being, economy, and to infrastructure. So in other words, climate change affects every imaginable facet of society and human activity. So that being said, as I mentioned earlier, it is imperative for us humans, who are mostly the source of this rise in sea level and temperature, to make necessary action to address climate challenges. So now we're gonna move on to a concern that is closer to all of us, which is the Philippines. So in the context of our country, an archipelagic country situated along the typhoon and the volcanic belt in the Pacific, climate change is a developmental concern affecting every areas of society. So typhoons alone have resulted in $15 billion in terms of losses and damage in the past decade. So that is from 2011 to 2018. An earlier estimate actually was as high as 2.7% of the GDP, without even accounting for opportunity cost. Unfortunately, while our casualties from disasters have continually declined for the past decade, socioeconomic impact, most especially that of hydrometeorological, such as typhoons and flooding, is expected to aggravate. All this leads us to the point that climate change, especially for the Philippines, our motherland, our country, is an existential concern and is therefore a categorical imperative. So if it is an existential threat, and if climate change is a categorical imperative, then what are we supposed to do? How we can act on it? Here, I'm gonna prescribe or introduce frameworks on how to go about climate action. So we can borrow the Pillars of Society framework used in many public administration schools. This framework highlights the equally significant roles of the state, the government, private sector, and the civil society. So that framework puts premium on collaboration between these sectors. And we see a lot of these today in many initiatives like CSRs, and initiatives by the government that is related to participatory governance. Although, of course, there's much to be done in this respect. Another interesting framework is the one devised and used by the UP Resilience Institute. So in contrast to the previous framework I mentioned, which focuses on actors, this one highlights the nature of the interactions between disciplines. So in this framework, climate action is deemed to work best if we transcend our own and collaborate with others through inter, multi, and transdisciplinary setups. So paano na-operationalize yung nabanggit ko kaninang framework? So just to illustrate to you more clearly, I'll provide examples on how, roles in society can contribute to climate action. For instance, scientists and researchers could use environment and climate change as frameworks in their respective disciplines. So just to give you an example, much of actually my personal work have delved into small and medium enterprises or private sector development. So I sort of like tried to fuse this with this area of my inquiry with resiliency. So in doing so, I sort of like fused the two, SME and resiliency, and I was able to come up with a study that focused on SME resiliency, which is not often studied in our context. So bukod sa maraming ideas na pwede ma-generate, we sort of like could contribute to climate action whenever we sort of like do trans and multidisciplinary work. Of course, creatives also play a very crucial role to translate concepts in climate action, climate change, the disaster risk management, and whatnot to more accessible and relatable ways. And of course, as well as to inspire the society to make a change. So of course, the youth also has a role to play. In fact, for example, we saw Greta Thunberg at her very young age, very instrumental in actually pushing for change in society and in politics. So she has inspired a lot of movements across the globe. And in fact, in the Philippines, may mga grupo tayo that sort of like aspires to have her initiative or to mimic her initiative. So again, these are just examples, but what I would like to say here is that, regardless of our status, whether, in terms of age, in terms of sex, in terms of gender, in terms of socioeconomic status, nationality, profession, and skills, all of us can contribute in our own little ways. So just a bit of sharing in terms of my personal experience. I'm a frustrated musician, so I play piano, but I'm not as good as those in College of Music. But even if I'm a frustrated musician, I try to contribute to our efforts against climate change by creating, and composing music that focus on, climate advocacy. And of course, as a gamer myself, a video gamer, I signed up for a beta testing for one of UPRI's initiatives, which is Sakunwari. So Sakunwari is a board game initiative by the UPRI. So it is worth noting that in all these activities, collaboration is very important. And I guess we just all have to put extra effort and look for like-minded friends and colleagues for us to actually start and make a change in terms of climate. So what is the role of women here? Since women is today is still part of Women's Month, and there seems to be the relationship between gender equality or women empowerment is not as often direct to the issues of climate. But of course, we have to see that this issue holistically, and women empowerment is not just a standalone objective, but in fact it can contribute to achieving sustainable development goals. So as you can see here, we have three things three examples on how women can actually contribute to climate action. But I'm gonna skip this in the interest of time, given that I only have, I think, 5 minutes. So I guess like gender inequality, we have this crucial role of quality education and provision of lifelong learning opportunities. These are very, of course, central to our efforts in mitigating and adapting to climate change, as well as building resiliency in our communities. So in essence, education is a very powerful tool for our society to change our ways, capacitate our communities, our systems, and generate new ideas for solutions. So therefore, it is important to actually incorporate sustainability as early as, nursery age and up to the tertiary and graduate level, so that we can have like a holistic effort in addressing climate change. So, but before we actually discuss tips on how to incorporate climate change, DRM, and sustainability into our classroom, it should be noted that, this is actually has been touched by several of our policies, including the Climate Change Act and the Philippine DRRM Act of 2010, also known as RA 10121. So they sort of like mandate or prescribe the integration of climate change into our curriculum at the tertiary, primary, and even secondary levels. So I guess I want to borrow tools from one of my favorite frameworks in political economy analysis as a political economist myself. So this is the 3 I's framework. Basically, it analyzes political phenomenon, economic phenomenon, social phenomenon through these 3 analytical foci. So institutions, interests, ideas. So using these 3 focus, I devised some ways based on experience, personal experience. But of course, please note that this list is not exhaustive, given that this is something preliminary pa. So in terms of institutions, I sort of like would like to recommend our institutions to form committees, study groups, labs, and other similar bodies, whether formal or informal, to focus on CCAM, or climate change adaptation and mitigation and disaster risk management. So at UPOU, we have the DRRM committee, and it is actually tasked to institutionalize DRM in our systems. So I guess we could all emulate that, and so that we can further our efforts in climate action. So another recommendation in terms of institutions is incentivizing further training and skills development on sustainable development. Here we can use we can go beyond formal schooling and sort of like integrate MOOCs or MOOCs, the massive online courses to capacitate our people for sustainable development, and our students, of course. Thirdly, we can integrate concepts, DRM concepts, sustainable developments into our curriculum and classroom activities. Later on, I'm gonna touch on these, on how we can sort of like integrate this in particular. In terms of interest, we can go outside the box with our classroom activities in some of our courses at FNDS, for in particular dun sa MENREM program. Some FIC sort of like conduct nature walks. So they ask the students to go outside to observe. And I guess that's a way, it's an interesting way to actually instill the value of nature and environmentalism in our students. Of course, we can do gamification. This is something new and unexplored. And I guess with millennials and Gen Z, they are into games. So we can actually better facilitate learning through different modalities, such as gamification and arts, I think. In terms of interest, we can encourage participation, advocacy, and community service, of course, if possible, and sort of like add quote unquote impact as a criterion for grades. I've seen a lot of capstone projects and research works that sort of have an applied element. So I guess that can be a way for us to have impact in our own little ways. Of course, in terms of ideas, we can foster creativity and free exchange of ideas. In one of my classes, I sort of like encourage our students to do creative work. Medyo, I guess, many are participative when they do creative work, and it makes learning more fun. I guess it could be a way for us to facilitate learning. Of course, we can encourage inter and transdisciplinary work, as mentioned or as I shared earlier. And finally, we can instill hope and values that are crucial for climate action. So I'm gonna move on to MPM. So MPM is actually one of the oldest and longest running programs in UPOU. Currently, we are the largest in terms of student population. So unlike in our residential counterpart at NCPAG, which is Master of Public Administration program, MPM doesn't have a specific standalone course on disaster risk management, climate change and adaptation and mitigation, and or sustainability. But of course, while students can take electives in other programs such as MENREM, our FICs make it a point to integrate sustainable development and other concepts related to environment and climate action into our course and activities. So these are just some examples on how we integrated sustainability in our program, in our courses. Again, this is not exhaustive, but I hope to give a snapshot on how we can sort of like further climate action and in classroom setting. So in terms of materials, we use climate change related resources. Sometimes we prescribe movies for students to watch and sort of like reflect upon. In terms of theories, we teach big theories and concepts related to environment and sustainable development, in particular SDGs. Many of our, I think most, if not all of our courses sort of like have this. So alam nila kung ano yung, every policy should contribute to sustainable development and our effort in mitigating and adapting against or vis-a-vis climate change. Of course, we also teach tools such as futures approach. We sort of like incorporate resiliency and sustainability. In terms of final outputs, as mentioned earlier, our outputs in terms of, in the form of term paper, capstone project, have CCAM, DRM, and sustainability elements. And finally, we encourage people to go out of our classroom, even if it's virtual, and sort of like join groups, conferences, events that are related to CCAM and DRM, so that they can have a more holistic learning and understanding of of DRM. And of course, apart from learning, they will also be able to improve to develop their collaboration skills, which is very important in our quest for climate action. Again, I hope I was able to contribute in greenifying our minds in our class. Again, maraming salamat to. Let us share some ideas on how to greenify the class and minds during our Q&A. So thank you once again for your attention.
Grabe, sir. I'm not even an educator, but as a student, the tips and the information that you have told us are something that can be also used as ideas and outputs even beyond the classroom. Thank you so much, Sir LA, for your substantive presentation on how to integrate the concept of sustainability in the classroom. And here's come my favorite part, the Q&A. We all know what to do, climate classmates. You may type your questions through the comment section in our UPOU networks, UPOU YouTube, or UPOU Facebook page. Let us know your thoughts and discuss what you have learned as well. We have one question right now, Sir LA. The question is, what amendments to our current educational policies should be done to further the cause of climate justice?
Oh, Leslie, hindi ko favorite ng Q&A. Anyway, in terms of the question, personally, I'm not really an expert on education policy, but I guess there's a lot of, we have the general policies na eh. We have the DRRM Act, as mentioned earlier. We have the Climate Change Act. But we sort of like have to have an operationalization of that policy. So I guess CHED could prescribe an outline, or maybe, us, the state university, the University of the Philippines, could really trailblaze this area where we can sort of like prescribe on how we can integrate sustainability, climate change action, climate change adaptation and mitigation, and DRM into our educational in our courses in our programs. So I guess that's my take on that. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sir L.A. Now, I cannot believe that we are halfway through this event. And the main thing I have learned is how climate justice can be so intersectional in different concepts and realities that makes it easier to be discussed. Allow me to introduce our next speaker, Miss Tony, who was a business student who found passion in teaching and leadership. She transferred to UPOU under the Education Studies program and is now handling the social media aspect of the Worldwide Teach in Philippines project. She also has been an English teacher in Japan for around 4 years, and she also started her own online Japanese language learning school business during the pandemic. As she's now advocating for the environment, she recently created the website Klima Papel for her ongoing practicum, wherein she curated climate and environment focused resources and designed localized lesson plans for Filipino educators to use in the climate teach-ins. On the creative side, Tony is also a budding artist who does acrylic and watercolor paintings, shares love for outdoor photography, reading books, and creating and sharing travel videos. So without further ado, let me invite Miss Tony Suzuki Ilagan, one of the co-leads of the Worldwide Teach in Philippines, to discuss more on the intersectionality of climate justice and youth. Miss Tony, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Leslie, for that introduction. Okay, so let me just share my screen. Okay, so can you hear me well? Okay, so again, so good afternoon, everyone. Today I'll be talking about making climate a conversation for the youth. So this part of the discussion, so we're in the casual side, I think. So these are just based on the experiences we have, especially in doing some work for Worldwide Teach In. Okay, and then, yep. So let me start with defining or uh, giving the meaning of youth. So, what does it actually mean? So, it says here it's best understood as a period of transition from the dependence of childhood to adulthood's independence. So, from United Nations. So, it's that in between. So, the phase wherein they're starting to learn how to decide for by themselves, and also they're learned enough or they've been aware enough to start talking about what what provokes them. So it's the youth, and then nowadays the youth has a different. For me, I think the youth has a different um, characteristics compared before when I was younger. So when I considered myself as the young adult uh, phase. So yeah, so in this discussion, so I'll be discussing the why. So why the youth should be included in the climate conversation, and then the who. So who are the youth, or who are uh, the people that are starting to work for the climate discussion or climate justice, and then the how, on how we'll start conversations for the youth, and or how will the youth start conversations for other people. And yeah, so I also want to thank our professional speakers earlier, so Dr. Arencio, Dr. Flor, and Prof. Lian. So I learned a lot with your talk. And yeah, so let me start with the first one. So the why. Uh, so the youth right now, I think more youth are in the forefront of raising awareness when it comes to climate justice. I've been seeing a lot of movements. I've been seeing a lot of groups who who are starting to talk about the environment, about the climate. And I think that's because the youth now, they're rooted in this awareness. That's why more of them are becoming present in the topic. So they're raised today, wherein today we see so much changes in the environment in such a short period of time. And examples are all the flood, the typhoons, the unexpected typhoons, and then all the other destruction in the environment. And they can see that directly. They don't have to watch past news. They don't have to read past research because they're experiencing it. So I think that's one of the reasons why more of them or more of the youth, I think I'll include myself as the youth. So more of us are starting to become what do you call this? Become more provoked or more active in this topic. So, and the next, so their present, their future. So they're working for their present and they're working for their future. So they're willing to advocate more now, and they're also resilient. So the youth now, there is much more resilience that they have this grit and they have the high chance to be passionate on something that they want to fight for, and in this case the environment. And then next, so as examples, so the who. So first, Greta Thunberg. So Assistant Prof Lian mentioned earlier. So I'll just give an overview or a quick overview of the popular youth activists that are working in climate justice. And I'm just going to talk on when they started, how they started, and what they are actually doing right now. So Greta Thunberg, so she's a Swedish environmental activist, and she started at 15, or I think earlier. If I'm not mistaken, I read something that she started around 8 when she started having this awareness in the environment. So, and then at 15, she started protesting outside of the Swedish parliament to raise awareness on the climate change. And then yeah, so she focuses on protests and strikes, lots of controversial strikes and protests, but it works, right? So more people are becoming aware. So some are provoked negatively, some are provoked positively. So it actually works. Her strikes, her advocacy, her way of communicating to the government, she's actually being seen. She's in the headlines, and people are like, "Oh, she's so young. She's doing this just for the climate." And then they're just, "Oh wow, she's so young and she's already advocating for the climate." So it's always like hate, right? So merong nag-agree, merong nag-disagree. But the thing is, it's starting a conversation about the climate. So yeah, so she started the school strike for climate and Fridays for future. So she's that's her ongoing, I think, organizations or what she's a part of. And next, so there's one to Alexandra Villaseñor. So she's an American climate activist and she started at 13. She was actually inspired by Greta Thunberg. She was also frustrated by the lack of progress in terms of the climate solutions and climate what do you call this? Climate plans. Yeah. So the plans, the progress of the plans. So she felt like there's not much that's being done. So that's why she started the protest as well. So she does a weekly school strike, and also she's a co-founder of the Earth Uprising. So it's another group that focuses on climate justice. And then so the third one, so I have here Mitzi Tang. So this one, I think you're familiar of her. So she's a Filipino climate activist and she started at 19. So how she started? So when she met with this indigenous leaders, that's how she got provoked on the topic that there's a need for a greener society, or there's a need for a reform in terms of the support for the green society, because indigenous leaders, of course, they they do their work and they do their life is all about protecting the environment, and I think that's what that inspired her. And yeah, so she does strikes, and she's an international spokesperson, especially for the Youth Advocates for Climate Action Philippines. So she's the co-founder of that as well, and she's also a member of the Fridays for Future organization of the Philippines. So she also collaborated with Greta Thunberg. So you see the connection that they're all connected with one another because of one being I cannot use the term, being popular. Yeah, so seeing it in, especially in social media. Okay, so now let's go to the how. So of course, this is the highlight of the discussion. And yeah, so how do we make climate a conversation for the youth? So surprise, it's not as difficult as we fear it to be. So as I've said earlier, so they are in the forefront. More youth are doing work for climate justice. Yeah, so they're already showing up, especially in social media. And then before I move on to the next slide, so I just want to read this quote that I recently read from Catherine Hayhoe. She said, "You don't have to know the details of the science to be part of the solution." So she also mentioned how um, it will take time for us to know all the science. And if we wait for that time before we start doing something, it will be too late. So what we should do is that uh, we start now. So for the youth, they should begin now, and they will learn as they go, as they start talking about it, as they start discussing about it, and it will come naturally as they converse about the climate, and they can learn from one another. So I think this is one of the fear of most people who want to start working for the climate. I think they're scared that they don't know enough science. They're scared that they don't know more facts. So I think that's the thing that we need to fix. That no, you don't need to know everything now, because you'll learn about them as you go along. What you need to do now is to start discussing, start talking about what you are learning, start talking about what you're seeing. So start influencing others, and yeah, so start starting the climate conversation. Okay, and then next slide. Okay. So before this, one tip that I've learned before is someone said to start by talking about something that you have in common. So a topic that will interest the person. So especially with youth, there's so much topics that we can talk to them about, or we can talk to each other about as a youth. And then, yeah, so sample topics are games, movies, songs, fashion, travel ideas, social media, anything in social media. There's always something that can lead to an environment topic, a climate topic. And yeah, so I'm going to start with this example. I'm going to use this example because I think this is very evident right now, especially again in social media. Fashion is a great influence on the youth. So, for example, you want to start discussing with your friends as youth. So, fast fashion. So, fast fashion is very evident right now. So you can see it, especially in social media, in websites. So fast fashion, buying apps, buying websites, they all pop up all the time, and they're usually cheap and low quality materials. So from there, maybe you know a brand that's known as this fast fashion fad, and then something that you know something about it that does affect the environment negatively. So you start with that, with simple topic. You know this brand, they do this, and maybe so they might get angry, they might get curious. So there's gonna be lots of responses, but the important thing is they will respond. And that is the start of the climate conversation. So that's just for fashion. So to talk about it in a positive way, so talk about sustainable brands that you know, or local brands that supports uh, environmental concerns. So for example, so I have here so some brands that we've actually featured and started working or partnering in some way. So Hanap Habi. So I don't know if you've heard of them, but yeah. So Hanap Habi means the materials used for their production. Yeah, mga nahanap at mga hinabi. So they upcycle old clothes and scraps that they find, and then they work with weavers in Cordillera. So they have a nice advocacy in terms of supporting the people in Cordillera and the support for local weaves. And then next, so OG3, so it's read as OG3. So this one, I want to highlight it because it's founded by a young adult, like a teenager who was just curious and who just had the idea that she wanted to raise awareness on the concepts of um, the environment or this, because she wants to be influential in terms to her generation. So she worked on this apparel. They sell shirts that has designs about the environment, and she's actually partnering with World Wildlife Fund. Right. Good. Okay. And then yeah, so I'm gonna show you the example. So this is Hanap Habi. So if you can see, so it looks like a normal jacket, a normal fashionable jacket, but there's a story behind it, and it's a local brand. And then this is OG3. So this one, it's called their Extinction shirt. I think the extinct tigers. I forgot then where it's from. I think in Indonesia. Yeah. So they feature stuff like that. So it's raising awareness in some way. And then next, so other points on the how. So starting casual conversations is very helpful. So I think Dr. Flor mentioned earlier, so storytelling. So yeah, so that's a really good way to start the conversation. So they become curious, they ask questions, and then the conversation goes on. That they become more aware and they even become interested to know more by themselves. So like after you converse, it's not done. For sure, they will have this sense of curiosity that they'll start actually researching on something, because that's the youth today. So when they get hype on something, they really learn about it. That's the thing that I like on their resilience, that when they like something, when they are interested in something, they do something about it and then they start working. So I think that's the reason why more organizations and more advocacy groups are popping up that are led by youth. Yeah. So yeah. And then so one another example, start casual conversations like, so have you seen this latest news on the protest for Nike and using kangaroo skin? So yeah, so that may have been a shock for many people. Like, what, they use that? And then, it raised awareness already. So from there, start a conversation and then let them express what they think about it. Let them talk about their ideas from it. So you see the initiation and then letting them talk. So as the youth. So there's always a response in the youth today. So they always respond, and that response can begin a good climate discourse. And then, yeah, encourage them to ask. So if they are curious about something, give them that space for them to ask. And then next, don't limit to scientific facts. So of course, the scientific facts are important for them to understand more of the details, but don't limit it to that. So let them have this freedom to talk about their ideas, not limiting them on the scientific facts. 'Cause they might have ideas like random ideas that's actually speaking about environmental solutions, might be crazy ideas. For example, me, as I believe I'm an adult now, but if a younger person tells me this thing, I might see it as a crazy idea. What are you saying? But actually, if with their resilience as the youth and their grit, they actually make it work. So it will surprise us how more of the really, really younger generation, or the Gen Z, as we say, have more ideas now in terms of environmental topics and solutions. And then, of course, so talk about your experience in starting your involvement with climate conversation. So in my case, when I started doing this and started the worldwide teaching, I didn't know everything. So I didn't know so much facts about climate change. I didn't know all the science because I was just curious on eco-friendly products. So that's how I started. I was just buying a reusable cotton, as in that was it. And then I was like, I should do more of this. And then that's how I started learning about what I can do for the environment. And then that's how it led me to do this. And then, yeah. So, and then to, before I end the presentation, so of course, the elderly household peers. So we're going to talk about this today as well. So with my other Worldwide Teach In co-lead. And yeah, so I think, yeah, so to end my presentation, I'm just going to show you this one. So it's a graphic from Miss Saito, Madeline Saito. And it says, can you imagine all of us trusting each other, working together for a common home? So you can see the interconnectedness of how everything will work out if we all work together for the common cause. And yeah, so that's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Miss Tony. Just to quote, the youth are getting more involved in topics like this. Youth, I included, are more passionate in fighting for their advocacies and starting to discuss about climate justice. As a result, youth are now more outward in thinking. And as a youth, I know that I'll be carrying this with my own personal advocacies. Thank you so much, Miss Tony, for that substantive presentation. Now, of course, it is not only the youth that can be of help in tackling climate justice, but also the elderly. Allow me to introduce our next speaker. Mr. Alec is a social science educator by profession. He graduated with a degree in BA Social Sciences at the University of the Philippines, Baguio, and is currently taking up his master's in ASEAN Studies at UP Open University. Pursuing passion for social justice, he is now the one of the leaders of Worldwide Teach-In for Climate and Justice Philippines as the head of the Events, Engagements, and Execution Committee. Being a musician, he is also involved with the team who composed and arranged the climate song titled Change Climate Change, which Bard College uses in their teach-ins around the globe. Let us all invite Mr. Alec Hope Buenaventura, one of the co-leads of the Worldwide Teach-In Philippines, to discuss how to apply the topic of climate to the elderly and household. Sir Alec, you may now have the floor.
All right. Thank you, Miss Leslie. And I just want to thank also my teammate, Miss Tony, and all the speakers that we had previously. And it's good to be back here, teach in UPOU. The topic for this discussion would be, let me just share my screen. All right, making climate a conversation, okay, about household and the elderly. All right. Now, before we start, it's important first that to actually grasp the topic. So the topic of household is actually very broad for us to discuss it piece by piece. And as Tony already discussed the youth, we will focus on the part of the elderly members of the household. Well, in general, when I discuss household, it can also be applicable to any members of the family. But of course, there is a certain portion where we will focus on how we can engage with the elderly in terms of talking about climate. Okay. Now, before we talk about how to engage with conversations with them, we must first know what we are talking about or who are we dealing with here. So we are dealing with the Filipino family and household. Now, there's a certain distinction between family and household, but as per the discussion today, we will just be using them interchangeably, and I will be using them deliberately. Okay, interchanging them deliberately. When we say family, it can be someone from your kin, no? Kadugo mo, a relative, of course, your nuclear family, okay? But you can exist in different locations. Like if there is an OFW in your family, he or she is still your family, right? When we talk about household, it doesn't really necessarily mean that you are of the same kin, but you are living in one roof, on one roof, okay? So that's what we mean by household. But again, for the sake of the discussion, we will just be using them interchangeably. Right now, we are not just dealing with family and household here. What we are talking about right now is Filipino. What we wanted to single out is we are talking about Filipino families here. So let us first meet. Sino nga ba ang Filipino family and household? When we talk about them, okay, what do we mean or how do we interact with them? Right? So, according to Taroha, Filipinos are described as family-centered. So us, as individuals, Filipinos, we are actually family-centered. Family is at the center of our life. It really matters to us. There is a big influence as to our decision-making in all our ventures in life, no, yung ating family. Right? And how do we perceive or how can we describe the Filipino family? The Filipino families are described as closely knit. Close daw tayo mga Filipino with our family members. Okay? Highly values reciprocity. Okay? It is kind of linked with our culture of utang na loob. So, we have that certain kind of feeling that we have to reciprocate what our parents have given us, the opportunities that they have for us. Okay? Kailangan natin i-reciprocate yon as children. And vice versa. No? Reciprocity is highly valued in our family. Has bilateral kinship system. So si Go, okay, he specified this bilaterally kinship system. Ano daw yon? No, specific to Filipino family, we are dealing with parents having children, but with the hopes that their children would eventually take care of them. Okay? That's actually a cultural issue, but it's just interesting to note that. But that's for another topic, right? Next, often extended. Okay, in the Philippines, well, we still have nuclear families, but often the setup of a household specifically is extended. When we say extended, I know we are all familiar with it. Ba? It's not just the nuclear family. Andyan yung mga tito, tita, ang ating lolo, lola. Okay? And they are actually part of our family. Affects also our decisions, how we are being enculturated and such. Okay? And authority is hierarchical. Okay? When we say hierarchical, okay, there is a certain line of who is in charge in the house. Okay? So, in the contemporary, when we talk about authority being hierarchical, it depends on who is the head of the household. And as per our traditional family setup, it would be the father. Okay? If it's extended, it would be the grandparents, or the grandparents has an influence. But right now in the contemporary, we have lots of non-traditional families as well. But still, authority is still hierarchical on that end. What else? Family is the center of identity formation, social learning, support, and role development. Simply put it, enculturation. What we know right now are our values. It came from our family. Our family taught that to us. Okay, and then eventually we have been socialized with the society when we interact with people. Okay, but initially, the culture of the Philippines, the Filipino culture, and all others that we have to learn when we are just a kid came from our household, came from our family. It's the first line of problem solving. If there's a certain issue in our society, it's the good way or it's a good point where we can start solving that problem because the family is the basic unit of the society, right? Next, elders of the family are given unquestionable respect. Okay, so two of our authors have mentioned authority already, and si Marusti actually specified the elders. The elders, okay, yung mas matanda, they have unquestionable respect. Okay, you have to give them that certain respect that you cannot question. It is part of the structure of our society, right? So we are talking about the structure of our households here, family and household here in the Philippines. Okay, elders have unquestionable respect. And in relation to the previous one, no, hierarchical ang ating authority. Right? And later on, that would amount into something when I discuss the elderly. All right. Now, making climate a conversation in household and elderly, okay, is not as easy as the youth. Okay, as mentioned by my colleague, Ms. Tony, the youth are very critical. The Gen Zs are very critical. But, well, household, elderly, especially if you are just the youth in the household, how would you engage a certain social issue like climate change into your normal everyday conversation? Okay, so in order for us to have a certain lens on how to view that, let us know climate issues and points of conversation or discussion that we can engage with our family. So ano ba yung mga bagay na nagmamatter in our family or to our family members, to our mother, to our father, okay, that we can start or spark that certain conversation about climate. And let us start with pointing out different climate issues and pointing out how to talk about them. Okay? With that, let us first discuss how we can approach this. So the general approach, not really a theoretical framework, okay, is cultural economy approach, right? So when we talk about climate change, usually it is environmental approach as we have discussed earlier. But when we talk about it in the household, we need another lens, an approach, and it needs to be cultural and at the same time economic. Cultural because we are dealing with the culture of the household, not just the culture of the household, the culture of the family in the Philippines, the culture of the Philippines at large. Okay, and how, okay, do we spend our resources? Economic. We have a culture of how we use our resources in the household. Okay, and that is what we are after. If we can point that out, we can talk about sustainability issues. Okay, so I have pointed out three coming from these authors. Okay, there are lots, but I just singled out, or I just specified these three. First, climate issues for the elderly. Second, consumerism and ineffective use of family resources. And third is lack of commitment to social and environmental concern. So these are cultural economy. As you can see, it's not just about culture. It's not just about economy. It is somewhat an intertwined with each other. It's a cultural and economic issue at the same time. Okay? Now, climate issues for the elderly. Okay, there are three. First is accountability. Second is skepticism and denial. The third is uncertainty. So based on the study of Moody, okay, he kind of discussed how elderly views climate change and the issues revolving around it. Okay, The first one is an issue on accountability. You can question actually their accountability. Okay? So, they ask these questions when talk about climate change. Why blame older people? We're all responsible for it anyway, aren't we? So that doesn't sound accountable at all, right? It's the fossil fuel companies. They're to blame for all this. Okay? One nation can't do it alone. Other countries will swamp anything we do here. So it's actually pointing another person for the blame. Well, in fact, according to Moody, well, it is actually part of their responsibility that we have lost. Okay, or that's why we have climate change right now. Okay, skepticism. When you say skepticism, they don't believe it, or they are kind of in denial. So I put also denial there. Climate scientists are exaggerating. Okay, it's a problem, but we really don't have any power to do over these things, to do anything about them. Okay, that's skepticism and denial. Okay, next. Okay, uncertainty. They point in, who really knows what will happen? Maybe something will turn up and technology will find a way. Okay, now the reason why they think this way, according to Moody, is that the elderly has lived a long life for them to actually affirm the aphorism of Mark Twain. I've had a lot of worries in my life, most of which never happened. Okay? Ewan ko kung nakarinig na po kayo ng ganito, but I have experienced that with a certain climate conversation. We talked about we talk about the science of climate change, but sinasabi niya sa akin, matanda na ako. Alam ko na yan, napagdaanan ko na yan. Hindi naman lumubog and all. Right? Now, points of conversation. Paano natin sila may engage given doon sa mga issues na yan? First, the ethical will. What is the ethical will? You can ask your lolo, your lola, your mommy, your daddy, okay? What legacy will you be leaving me as your child? Okay? Diba? Mami, ano bang ginawa mo? Diba? For our issue of climate change. What would you be leaving me, the next generation? Anong maaabutan ko pagtanda ko? Anong maaabutan ng mga next generation sa akin? Ng mga magiging apo mo? Etc. Okay? That's the ethical will. What morality will you pass on to the next generation? And specifically in this discussion, okay, climate justice. Okay? Next, intergenerational responsibility. Narinig nyo na ba yun noon at ngayon story? Okay? Malamang one way or another narinig nyo yan sa inyong mga lolo or lola or nanay or tatay. No? Noon, ang linis ng Marikina River. Ngayon, ang dumi-dumi na. Okay? Now, that story actually is, well, feeling nila na they are just reminiscing something, but actually, you can start there and point out that it is actually your responsibility. Okay? Now, what are you gonna do right now? Okay? It's never too late, even though they are elderlies, to actually engage them in conversation about this and for them to actually do something about it. Okay? Hindi pa yan huli. Okay? Next, healthcare issues. Ang mga elderly, sa madaling sabi, sila po ay vulnerable sa mga health issues na dinudulot ng climate change. They are very sensitive to the changes in the environment, in the temperature, right? For example, the air quality index has these warnings that older persons are included in the category of sensitive populations, including infants and children and those with cardiorespiratory disease. Okay? You can talk about that. Okay? O, di ba, ang init. Di ba? Mahilig magreklamo ang mga tao in general kapag mainit. Ang init. Then, point of conversation. Okay? O, kaya mainit, tas magbibiglang uulan, magkakasakit ka talaga. Right? Next, consumerism. Okay, yung ating, of course, yung pagbili, nagko-consume ang tao, ang household, okay, yung mga bagay na pangkailangan natin sa bahay, and then ang ending, emission of greenhouse gas, producers ng greenhouse gas. More consumption, more carbon footprint. Basically, Okay, points of conversation, green identity. Okay, is it worse kung gagamit tayo ng plastic sa supermarket, no? Kaysa mag-reusable bags tayo. Yung mga ganong initiative sa bahay, you can propose that. Okay? Inculcate green identity to your household. Okay? Household resource management, are we spending so much on unnecessary purchases? Sumusobra ba tayo ng consumption? Meron ba tayong mga napapanis lamang na pagkain? Okay? Because we just consume, we have a huge carbon footprint. Okay? We can manage naman pala. Okay? Di ba? Losing end ka niyan. Okay? Energy efficiency. Ito ay sa pinakamagandang tip ko sa inyo, no? Less energy consumption means cheaper electricity bill. Diba? And also, less greenhouse gas emissions. Okay? Sa lahat ng tatay sa buong mundo, may isa yang sasabihin. Okay, wag mong iwan nakabukas ang ref. Diba? Nagsasayang ka ng kuryente. Okay? So, ipaliwanag mo sa kanila, pag di tayo masyadong magastos, okay? Magastos sa kuryente, okay? Konti yung ating babayaran sa bill. And at the same time, you are actually saving energy. Right? So, I'm at the tail end of the presentation na. So, social and environmental concern. Ayan. So, may problema daw ang mga families in committing ourselves into environmental concerns. Okay? So, kailangan daw i-consider yan. For instance, as families grow in urban centers, they need to dispose waste properly. Okay? Waste disposal is number one problem in urban centers. Okay? So, garbage disposal, trivial as it may seem, should therefore be a topic of concern in family circles. Okay, doon kasi nagsa-start yan. Diba? Ang households, may mga kanya-kanyang basura yan. Oh, that's just one example. And that is also a point of conversation. Okay? Is it worse to waste water rinsing out tin cans or just putting them in recycling bin? No? Now, their opinions, the opinion of your kamag-anak, your lolo, lola, your tito, tita, okay, would amount to something. That's a conversation already about sustainability. Okay, what are the benefits if we are to segregate waste? Okay, and then yung magpasok ka ng mga nalalaman mo tungkol sa climate change, hindi kailangan mabigat, as they have said. Okay? Disaster risk management. Okay, you can just easily ask your father, tayo ba pag tayo ay nilindol or tayo ay binaha, ready ba tayo? Okay, anong ginagawa natin to reduce that risk, to manage it? Okay? High temperature increases the risk of fire. Okay, anong safety measures natin? Diba? So in conclusion, okay, as I have mentioned, ang ating family is the locus of identity formation, social learning, support, and role development. It is a good start, okay, to inculcate, to hone climate consciousness to our society kasi siya ang basic unit at yan ay hindi mawawala. Okay, kukonti ang bata, pwedeng dumami ang matanda, pero ang family will always be there. So with that, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Sir Alec. Indeed, culture greatly influences our identity and how this shapes our decision making and starting a climate conversation in our family. Now that we have discussed the aspect of youth, the elderly, and household, how about our peers? I am sure that Miss MC have an incredible presentation about this. Allow me to introduce Miss Maricris Edquila. Maricris Edquila is also known by her nickname MC, has always been passionate about using her artistic talent to express herself and share her ideas with the world. From a young age, she has known a natural ability to come up with unique and compelling ideas, and she has always been eager to find new ways to showcase her creativity and share her vision with others. Whether it's through writing, design, film, music, or any other medium, MC is constantly seeking new opportunities to grow and explore the field of multimedia. Miss MC is a third year student at UPOU, taking the degree of BA Multimedia Studies and the consulting chief financial officer of the Worldwide TGN Philippines. Everyone, please welcome Miss MC Edkila through virtual applause.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Leslie. So, again, I'm MC, and to start my presentation, let me just share my screen. Okay. There you go. So my presentation will be about mobilizing peer action on climate and justice. So the big question that I'm gonna be tackling for today is how can peer action be used to mobilize for climate justice? So here is the outline of my presentation. So first, I'm gonna have a brief introduction, and then I will be talking about understanding the power of peer action and mobilizing peer action for climate justice, and then overcoming barriers to peer action, and we will be concluding our presentation. So before we define peer action, let us first define what is a peer group. So a peer group in sociology is a social group and a primary group of people who have similar interests, age, background, or social status. So peer action refers to the collective action taken by individuals within a peer group or community, which may be driven by shared values, norms, and goals. So peer action is distinct from government-led action. It relies on voluntary participation and may have a different scope or focus. So as the consulting financial officer of Worldwide Teach in Philippines, we focus on actually having climate conversations and teach-ins to different schools and universities, and that's our focus. Peer action does not actually replace the need for government intervention. Rather, it can complement government-led action by creating grassroots on momentum, building political will, and actually holding the government accountable for their commitments. While mobilizing peer action is actually important strategy for addressing climate change, it is not the only effective way to do so. Other strategies such as government-led campaigns, private sector engagement, and individual behavior change are also necessary for achieving meaningful progress in addressing climate change. So peer action is actually very important to me because I think that it can complement government-led action, and we're living in a democratic country, and I think it's very important to talk about these issues as long as that we're actually respectful to the government-led action that are actually initiated now, and hopefully we're still in the democratic process for the next years. And to emphasize now the importance of mobilizing peer action for climate justice, for me, mobilizing peer action is crucial for addressing climate change and creating lasting change. Okay, climate change is a global crisis nga that disproportionately affects the marginalized communities and exacerbates existing inequalities. So mobilizing peer action is important for two main reasons. It allows collective action and creates a sense of community and ownership over the issue. So, why do we need collective action? The problem is too large for us or any individual to solve alone. And this collective effort can be powerful in creating change and achieving sustainable future. Ultimately, mobilizing peer action is a crucial component of the broader effort to address climate change and promote climate change. It allows individuals to actually come together, share their knowledge and resources, and work towards a sustainable future. By empowering communities and creating a sense of ownership over the issue, mobilizing peer action can help ensure that progress towards climate change is sustained and lasting. So let me go over the overview of the impact of climate change on communities. So this can be points of conversation for peers, because these are just reasonable and very easy to talk about, I guess. And first is food scarcity. So climate change is affecting food production and reducing agricultural yields. This puts food security at risk and affects the livelihoods of millions of people who depend on our agriculture. Next would be water scarcity. Climate change is reducing the availability of fresh water in many regions, increasing the risk of drought and water scarcity. This again affects agriculture as well as access to safe drinking water for communities. So actually here in the Philippines, we're very lucky that we're surrounded with different bodies of water, but we're still being affected by droughts, diba? The El Nino season will be coming in June, so we really need to be aware of that stuff. And also next would be natural disasters. Climate change is increasing the frequency and severity of natural disasters, including hurricanes, floods, wildfires, and droughts. These events can have devastating impacts on communities, including loss of life, property, and displacement. Also, health impacts. Climate change is contributing to the spread of diseases, including those carried by insects and other vectors. So, for example, when La Nina season came, tapos may flooding na, leptospirosis, it will be very hard for us to heal those people who are actually affected na. And yun. And then extreme heat and air pollution can also have direct impacts on human health. Also, migration. Climate change would also cause displacement and migration as people seek to escape the impacts of climate-related disasters, food and water scarcity, and other impacts. So ayun nga, 'di ba, meron sinabi na din from our past speakers, we should be aware na there's like this risk of having Metro Manila go submerge on the water. So ayun, may madi-displace talaga and there's this risk of displacement and migration for us Filipinos. And also economic impacts. Climate change is affecting economies in many regions, particularly those that rely on agriculture, tourism, and other sectors vulnerable to climate impacts. So let me move on to understanding the power of peer action. So to define peer pressure is the social influence that peers or members of a social group exert on individuals to conform to their group's values, norms, and behaviors. It can take different forms such as direct persuasion, implicit pressure, or modeling of behavior. So peer pressure may have positive socialization value by promoting healthy behaviors, fostering social support, and increasing a sense of belonging. However, it may also have negative consequences for mental and physical health, such as engaging in risky behavior, substance abuse, or experiencing social exclusion. So what we do in Worldwide Teach In is that we actually really research and make resources and give them to people so that we're gonna have a positive socialization. And for the role of peer networks in influencing behavior, the role of peer networks in influencing behavior is crucial in understanding how peer pressure operates. Peer networks refer to the interconnected relationships among peers or groups that share common interests, values, or identities. Peer networks can amplify messages and increase engagement by creating a sense of shared identity, trust, and social influence. They can play a powerful role in shaping an individual's attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors, particularly during adolescence and peer relationships that are particularly important. So peer pressure can influence behavior and really drive change. So let me move on to the examples of successful peer action campaigns. So my examples here are actually not related to climate justice, like climate justice or environmentalism, but I just want to show you that peer action can actually be successful. So if you remember, there is a ice bucket challenge, which is actually a peer campaign that went viral on social media in 2014. The campaign involved people pouring a bucket of ice water over their heads, sharing the video on social media, and challenging their friends to do the same to donate to the amyotrophic lateral sclerosis research, or ALS. It succeeded by harnessing the power of social networks and personal connections to create a viral movement for a cause. And then we also have the Me Too movement, which actually relied on individuals sharing their stories on social media, and its success can be attributed to the power of influence and the strength of personal narratives. So it sparked a global conversation about sexual violence and harassment that led to changes in workplace policies, laws, and social attitudes toward sexual misconduct. The movement is an example of how peer campaigns can actually empower individuals to speak up and drive social change. So going on to the most important part of my presentation, mobilizing peer action for climate justice. So first, one should identify and engage with peer groups. To do that, to identify with peer groups, it's important to consider your demographics, your interests, and social networks. And then peer groups can actually include your family, your colleagues, and your friends, and of course, online communities. Engaging in peer groups can be done through personal connection, shared experiences, and common goals. So, to build trust and credibility with your peers, it can be done by being honest, transparent, and authentic to them. It's important to listen and respect their opinions and respond to their need. So if they told you that they're feeling anxious about climate, and you need to be there for them and actually empathize with them so you can reach them personally. You also have to provide value and delivering on promises that can help build trust and creativity. On the providing value, this is where you can start doing your homework. You need to research about climate justice and how can you help. So next is developing effective messaging and strategy. So when you're telling something telling someone something, you should always be clear, concise, and tailored to your audience. So again, when you're talking to, when you're talking to your grandparents and the youth, it must be tailored to their interests. And then it should also be compelling and engaging and relevant. So the strategies should be focused on actionable steps that peers can take and should provide opportunities for feedback and engagement. So next would be leveraging technology to reach and mobilize peer networks. So technology can be used to reach mobile and peer networks to social media, messaging apps, and online communities. It's actually important to use these platforms that are relevant so that the peer group will actually thrive. But we also have to be mindful of their privacy and such. So technology can also be used to track engagement and measure the impact of peer campaigns. So this will be the last slide. So how to address skepticism and resistance to change? One is to always promote education and awareness. Educating people about the benefits of the proposed change and creating awareness about its importance can help reduce skepticism and resistance. And second would be participation and involvement. So you have to include people in decision-making process and seek their participation. So I think all of us naman parang needs support or and that actually where participation and involvement comes. Participation and involvement can help people feel valued and more likely to support the change. So next one is to always communicate. Clear and effective communication about the change and its impact can help alleviate concerns and misunderstandings. Fourth and lastly, we should incentivize and reward. Actually, we had this initiative in Worldwide Teach-In that we made just this month, I think. We held a photo competition and we actually had monetary awards for the participants. So that's an example of providing incentives or rewards for those who embrace the climate justice initiative and movement. Yeah. So for your peers, I think having incentive and rewards may be just in the form of companionship. Yeah. And to move on, I'm on the part of overcoming barriers of social norms and cultural values. We must be culturally sensitive always. We want to understand and respect cultural values and norms, which is essential to overcoming two barriers of change. And then we shall also adapt to local context. Adapting to the proposed change to fit within the local cultural context can help overcome resistance. So, kanina, when Leslie introduced Miss Tony, she actually made a localized resource for our teachers, which is Klima Papel, and I really loved her for that because it was very helpful for us. And then providing alternatives. So we should always look for alternative solutions that align with cultural values that help people embrace the climate justice movement. So next is how to address the misconception and misinformation Same as the first ones in addressing skepticism and resistance to change, we should always educate and promote awareness. We should always communicate. And then to address the misconceptions and misinformation, we should also provide evidence. Providing evidence and data to support the proposed change can help people understand the importance of the change. So addressing concerns. When addressing concerns and questions, this will alleviate fears and misunderstanding. So that's really important for us. Next would be building resilience and sustainability in peer action movements. So we should also collaborate in decision making. We should also have diversity and inclusion. Ensuring the diversity and inclusion in peer action movements can help build resilience and sustainability. So capacity building, building the capacity of participants through training and support can help them build resilience and sustainability. And then networking, building strong networks and partnerships with other organizations and movements can also help build resilience and sustainability. So yan, to conclude, peer action can be a powerful tool for climate justice. It can mobilize, it can help in mobilizing diverse peer networks, which is crucial for creating a lasting change, and collaboration and collective action are key to addressing climate change, and the future of peer action for climate justice depends on sustained efforts and ongoing engagement. So I think I'm ready for the questions. Also, I would like to promote the Worldwide Teach-In for Climate Justice PH social media pages, so everyone will be keep posted for our webinars and maybe events.
Thank you so much, Miss MC, for your presentation. I agree that peer pressure really hinders us to start a conversation, especially when talking about climate justice without being provoked as a quote unquote woke person. But through creativity, we get to spark curiosity, promote discussion about climate justice, and empower our peers in committing to social responsibility. How about you, our fellow climate classmates? I'm pretty sure that you have learned new things as well as questions that will further help you in applying your learnings beyond this webinar. With this, I am opening again the floor for the questions so we can discuss it more. You may type your questions through the comment section in our UPOU networks, UPOU YouTube, or UPOU Facebook page. Let us know your thoughts and ask away. As of right now, we have one question, and I guess this is addressed to anyone that wants to answer this. The question is, what is the understanding of climate change in the local context? Example given, smallholder farmers. Do they have a similar understanding or concept of climate change compared to scientists? Or are there any challenges in their knowledge and understanding?
Do you want to answer, guys? Maybe I'll go first. Same understanding with the farmers, of course. I think not that much, not as much as the scientists have in terms of technicalities. But in terms of on-ground experience, yes, they have. That's why it's important that we also incorporate uh, indigenous peoples, farmers, and even the urban poor in these kinds of discussions, because they are actually the ones who are experiencing most of the effects of climate change. Okay, so their knowledge about it is more on experiential, and as a critical approach or developmental approach, it's really necessary for us to hear them. But in terms of the comparing their knowledge about climate change in terms of the scientific or the scientists, I think we have a certain gap in the Philippines in terms of education and of course privilege. When we talk about that, no? Of course, the most of our, not really farmers, no, the farm workers are less privileged in terms of having education. And of course, when they enter school, there's also this issue that that our curriculum does not talk much about climate change. So even though they are uh, able, they have that privilege to go to school and talk about climate change there, I think it will not be that sufficient, or not really sufficient. It would not be the same level as what we are discussing here today with our speakers, the first three speakers, like the way they discussed it. So to answer that, they don't have the, maybe they don't have the same level. I don't have the data. That's why I don't have the certainty. But in terms of the structures of the laws and policies, when you look at it and the privilege that we have, or the issues of privilege that these farmers and even the indigenous peoples have, they don't have the same level, but they have that certain wisdom of experiencing the effects of climate change and how to deal with it actually.
Dr. Benji, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I agree with Sir Alec, no, that there is a high level of understanding of what climate change is among our farmers, but not as maybe as scientific as the scientists. But because they are on the ground, they've experienced it, so they are in a better position to really describe what is happening to them and what interventions do they have to do based on experience. And we found that out in the technical baseline study that we did with the World Bank in 2016. So we had this project all over the Philippines, and most of the farmers really have developed biosignals or bioindicators to tell them that there is something wrong and that we should do something about it. And so they started also to believe insurance, crop insurance. So they started subscribing to crop insurance because they really know that there is something wrong, that the climate has changed, and that this difference is something that would impact their farms and their productivity. So it's not that it's there are, I think, more of champions, no, rather than skeptics or in denial. And of course, the baseline survey that we did would really tell us that there are more civilians who are not really aware of what climate change is. But the farmers, I think, are very much in touch, especially that our extension workers are also doing their share. The Department of Agriculture has also has a climate field school that would get in touch with our farmers directly. So I think the knowledge is high, and they are in a position to really recognize that the climate is changing and that the impacts of climate change would definitely affect their farms.
Thank you so much, Dr. Benji. Any speakers from our floor that wants to answer the question? All right, let me go ahead for the next question. For the next question, I guess this is addressed for Miss Tony. The question is, as a youth in the Philippines, how can I participate in climate action?
Oh, okay, thank you for that question. How can you participate? So yeah, I think you can actually start with us. So Worldwide Teach in Philippines. So we actually welcome people who want to work with us. Like for example, uh, so as a youth, so maybe you can help with some social media promotion, like for example, promoting our socials, and by starting there, like promoting advocacy groups or environmental groups or climate justice groups. So from there, you start to influence others. And then, so if, because I don't think it's easy to, of course, make your own. So what you can do, so try to join or apply. So I think maraming ngayon mga groups nag-accept din ng interns. So not just the Worldwide Teach-In. I've been seeing posts actually from other organizations. There's a lot na they're looking for interns who can do social media posts, who can also be ambassadors. And then, yeah, I think being an ambassador is a good one, especially if you're active in social media, if active and when it comes to talking to your peers, or lalo na if you have this um image already. So I think most naman ng youth ngayon mahilig na sa pag-post ng kanilang mga ginagawa, 'di ba, sa social media, especially with Instagram, TikTok, yan. So those platforms, they can actually help. So especially Facebook then. So start by talking about these groups, and then from there you learn naman you learn about what's in the climate discussions. And then, yeah, so I think from there malalaman mo kung ano yung gusto mong gawin. Would you want to be a part of a certain group? Would you want to create your own group? Would you want to advocate for this group? You want to, you'll find your purpose in those process. And then, yeah, so I think Worldwide Teach in Bard, so they're actually also, I think they're still looking for ambassadors as well. So you can check that out. So maybe you can also plan on joining their internship next year. So because I think they just do it every year. So yeah, you can start by looking at the groups.
Thank you so much, Miss Tony. Uh, this is addressed for Miss Tony, but any speakers maybe are interested to answer as well. All right, maybe we can have one more room for another question. I think this is addressed to any of the speakers that are educators, because as mentioned, climate justice needs to be localized here in our country. If as an educator, uh if a fellow educator asks you right now, what is the one main thing you can give as a tip that can be easily added to their curriculum? Any speakers that wants to answer?
Hi, Leslie. Can I share my insight on with regard to your question?
Go,
I guess,
Sir LA.
yeah, sobrang pang beauty queen naman ng tanong. But anyway, so just to answer you, I guess if there's one thing that we could, provide or give tip on a fellow educator, that is to go beyond or go outside the box. I think this Generation Z, millennials are so um would like something that is beyond the traditional. For instance, I've seen this generation to sort of like want games more. I guess for instance, ay kanina nabanggit ko yung yung potential ng gamification on sort of like uh making climate change knowledge concepts and advocacy to be more relatable. So I guess for fellow educators, we have to reach out to them by going outside the box. So that's one of my tips on how we can, integrate sustainability in our classrooms.
Thank you so much, Sir LA. Any of the speakers would want to answer as well? Yes, Dr. Benji.
In the book that we've written on innovative strategies, one of the recommendations there was to have a scorecard. So for communities or students, we have different scorecards that would measure their awareness level. And of course, once we have the awareness level, then content will follow. So it depends on what kind of group would you like to benchmark. But there is this measurement. There are indicators that will give you an idea of what kind of audiences do we have and what can be done to raise their awareness and eventually their knowledge. The book is, I think, downloadable from academia and ResearchGate.
And thank you so much, Dr. Benji. If you have the link, maybe um you can post it or somewhere.
I'm not sure about the book because the book is for sale with IGI Global,
Oh,
but I have a copy, so I don't know if that would if that would not be violating the contract that we've signed with IGI. But it's very easy to measure the level of awareness and what can be done given the level.
okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Benji. What a substantive discussion, climate classmates. I am pretty sure that all of us significantly learned new things that we would carry as we continue to advocate for climate justice in our own advocacy or expertise. At this point, allow me to call on Dr. Maripres Salinas to formally close the event. Dr. Salinas, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. At this point, I would like to thank our speakers, Dr. Peg Chris Orencio for his talk on AAA of climate solutions, Dr. Benjamina Paula Flor on knowledge sharing for collective climate action, and Assistant Professor Lian Angelico De Pante for sharing his tips for integrating sustainability into the classroom. And thank you also to our speakers from the Worldwide Teaching Philippines, Tony Suzuki Ilagan, Alec Hope Buenaventura, and Marie Chris Edquila for sharing tips on how to make climate a conversation. So we envision that through this webinar, we could reach out to many participants and encourage them in making climate a topic for regular conversations. With the threatening impacts of climate change, especially to developing countries like the Philippines, which we all know is very high in exposure, vulnerability, and susceptibility, we hope to increase the public awareness and share knowledge on climate solutions and actions. So we are hopeful that through this webinar, we were able to provide opportunities for a meaningful conversation towards climate solutions. Because climate change intersects with almost all issues in society, such as poverty, food security, flooding, drought, public health, gender, and education. Everyone must be part of the solution. And we are all familiar with SDG 13. Hopefully, with regular dialogues like this webinar, we will be compelled to work together and take urgent actions to combat climate change and its impacts. So let me also recognize our partners, the Bard College and the Worldwide Teaching Philippines. On behalf of the Faculty of Management and Development Studies, I would like to extend our gratitude to our partners for collaborating with us on this activity. Of course, thank you to our Dean, Dr. Joanne Serrano, for leading this event, and also to our working committee. Thank you very much. And most especially to our online participants. We are happy that you were able to join us this morning, and we invite you to join us again in the future as we continue to be part of promoting Make Climate a Conversation campaign. So again, thank you and good day to all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Salinas. Well, this event ends now. Making climate a conversation does not end here, but it happens much, much more beyond. It is a movement that we do each day. For the participants, kindly accomplish the evaluation form currently that will be flashed on your screens. Alright, yeah, that's already flashed on the screens. Your certificates will be issued after accomplishing the evaluation form. So that's it, guys. Thank you so much, everyone. Once again, I'm your host, Leslie V, and it's a fulfillment as we made climate a conversation for this event. We hope that you have a great week ahead. From my heart to yours, spreading love, and see you on the next climate event.